What if one of the longest hatreds in human history didn't begin with a single event? What if it wasn't born from one war, one leader, or one moment, but from centuries of misunderstanding, fear, and repeated lies? Because the truth is unsettling. The hostility toward Jews did not suddenly appear in modern times. It stretches back over 2,000 years, crossing empires, religions, cultures, and continents. And yet, in every era, it seemed to take a slightly different form, which raises a difficult question. Why? Why has this pattern repeated for so long? To understand it, we have to go back, not just to one moment, but to the foundations of history itself. In the ancient world, Jewish communities were already distinct. Their beliefs, rooted in one God, stood apart from the polytheistic traditions of surrounding civilizations like the Greeks and Romans. They did not worship the same gods. They did not follow the same rituals. They maintained their own laws, identity, and way of life. And in a world where unity often meant sameness, difference could be seen as defiance. During the time of the Roman Empire, tensions grew. Jewish revolts against Roman rule led to brutal crackdowns, including the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. But the consequences were not just political. They were psychological. A people who resisted assimilation, who held on to their identity despite pressure, were increasingly viewed with suspicion. Over time, this suspicion evolved, and as history moved into the early Christian era, a new layer was added. Some interpretations within early Christianity began to blame Jews collectively for the death of Jesus Christ. This accusation, often referred to as deicide, spread widely, despite the fact that it oversimplified complex historical realities. But once an idea like that takes root, it becomes powerful. For centuries, it influenced attitudes, sermons, and laws. And slowly, what began as theological disagreement turned into social exclusion. Jewish communities were often forced to live separately, restricted from certain jobs, and treated as outsiders within European societies. Then came another shift. During the Middle Ages, fear and ignorance gave birth to some of the most dangerous myths in history. When the Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions, people searched desperately for answers. They didn't understand disease. They didn't understand bacteria. So they looked for someone to blame. And once again, Jews became targets. False accusations spread that Jewish communities had poisoned wells. These claims had no evidence, but they spread rapidly, fueled by fear. And fear doesn't need proof. It only needs a story that feels convincing. Mass violence followed. Entire communities were destroyed, not because of truth, but because of belief. As centuries passed, discrimination became embedded in law and culture. Jews were often barred from owning land, joining guilds, or participating fully in society. In some places, they were pushed into specific professions, such as money lending, because other opportunities were closed to them. And here's where another dangerous pattern emerged. The very roles they were forced into were later used against them. Stereotypes began to form, portraying Jews as greedy or manipulative, not because of who they were, but because of the limited options they had been given. It was a cycle: exclusion, followed by blame; restriction, followed by resentment. And over time, these stereotypes hardened. Then, in the modern era, something changed again. The hatred evolved. It became more systematic, more ideological. In the 19th century, antisemitism began to shift from religion to race. Jews were no longer just seen as people of a different faith, but as a fundamentally different and inferior group. This idea had no scientific basis, but it was presented as if it did. And that made it even more dangerous. Because when prejudice disguises itself as fact, it becomes harder to challenge. This racial anti-Semitism spread across parts of Europe, influencing politics, culture, and society. And eventually, it reached its most extreme and horrifying form under Adolf Hitler. What happened during the Holocaust was not an isolated explosion of hatred. It was the result of centuries of ideas, layer upon layer, building up over time. Old religious prejudices, medieval myths, modern racial theories, all converging into one catastrophic outcome. 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. But even after that unimaginable tragedy, the hatred did not fully disappear. Which brings us to a difficult truth. Anti-Semitism has survived not because it is based on reality, but because it adapts. In different times, it takes different forms. Sometimes religious, sometimes economic, sometimes political. But at its core, the pattern remains the same. It identifies a group, it assigns blame, it spreads simplified narratives for complex problems, and it repeats them until they feel true. But here's the deeper layer, the one that goes beyond history. Because this is not just about one group, it is about a human tendency. The tendency to fear what is different, to simplify what is complex, to blame when we don't understand. Think about today's world. How quickly do people form opinions based on headlines, rumors, or social media posts? How often do we see entire communities reduced to stereotypes? It may not look exactly like the past, but the mechanism is the same. A young student hears repeated jokes about a certain group. At first, they seem harmless, but over time, those jokes shape perception. That perception shapes attitude, and that attitude shapes behavior. Not through hatred at the beginning, but through normalization. That is how it starts. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. And that is why understanding history matters. Because when you see the pattern, you can break it. The story of anti-Semitism is not just about why the world has hated Jews. It is about how hatred itself is built, how it spreads, how it survives, and how it can be stopped. Because at the end of the day, hatred is not inevitable. It is learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. So the real question is not just about the past, it is about the present. When you hear a story about a group of people, do you question it? Do you seek truth? Or do you accept it because it is repeated often enough? Because history has shown us where that path can lead, and the responsibility to choose a different path now belongs to us. So let me ask you, when faced with fear, difference, or uncertainty, will you follow the pattern of the past, or will you be the one who breaks it?